Well, hello and welcome to today's event. I'm Carol Flagg, Advancers Media Network. Thanks so much for joining us for this invaluable discussion on the use of AI technologies in healthcare and what that means for cybersecurity, everybody's favorite topic. This event is in collaboration with TrustCommerce, an integrated healthcare payment solutions company providing a simpler, tech-driven payment experience to drive revenues and ultimately better health outcomes. Learn more about them at trustcommerce.com. We're scheduled today to go the full hour, and if time allows, take some of your questions. Please use the Q&A tool on your dashboard to pose a question or to comment. This discussion will be focused around identifying fraud, identity proofing, and social engineering, though this is a panel discussion and our moderator and panelists are free to explore other areas as they arise. Our moderator for this discussion is Matt Fisher. Matt is a proven legal leader helping to guide companies through the many complexities in the healthcare industry, working to advance the goals of the companies he works with and make legal an approachable part of the team. He is actively involved in leadership of the American Bar Association Health Law Section and with HIMSS. Matt is also host of Healthcare du Jour, the longest continuously airing show on our Healthcare Now Radio network. You can follow Matt's show on the program page on healthcarenowradio.com. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Heather Randall is the Chief Compliance Officer at TrustCommerce. She brings 2 decades of payments industry experience to the company, managing their regulatory compliance and information security. As CCO, she is responsible for ensuring all products, platforms, and processes enable and support compliance with regulations and industry standards. Prior to joining the company, she held numerous compliance positions, most recently at TSYS. Learn more about Heather on the TrustCommerce website. Lee Kim is a senior principal of cybersecurity and privacy at HIMSS North America, where she serves as subject matter expert, public policy professional, and an analyst. She is a member of the U.S. DHS Analytic Exchange Program and the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center National Visiting Committee. She is also an AV preeminent peer review rated attorney in healthcare and intellectual property law. Lee authors both domestic and international works and is a candidate for election to the ISC2 board. Voting starts today, so learn more about her candidacy at isc2.org. And rounding out our panel is David Finn, who is the EVP of Governance, Risk, and Compliance at FHIMSS Health Advisory. He has spent nearly 4 decades as an IT privacy security leader in the healthcare industry and joins FHIMSS Health after 2 years as a vice president at Chime. Prior to Chime, he served as EVP of External Affairs, Information Systems, and Security at Synergist Tech, Health Information Technology Officer for Symantec, and was the CIO and VP of Information Systems at Texas Children's Hospital. Learn more about David at FHIMSS Health Advisory. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Welcome, Matt. Welcome, Heather, David, Lee. Good to see you. I'm going to go on mute, and I'm going to turn this conversation over to you guys.
Well, Carol, thank you for the introduction and getting us going. So as Carol said, we're going to dive into implications of AI when it comes to cybersecurity risks, and also I think potentially some proactive defensive measures that we might be able to employ using AI. But I always find that real world examples and real life lessons are a great way to understand what the risks and the dangers might be. So Heather, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn it over to you first and see if you can maybe pull out a story or two that you've seen recently or an experience that you've encountered that can begin to explain what some of the risks might be.
I think one of the better known stories, and we had a conversation about this earlier among some of our panelists, and it's sort of one of a very large magnitude that I think really illustrates the potential dangers of this, is a financial institution in Hong Kong, I believe it was Hong Kong or Singapore. One of their employees was tricked by a deepfake video of their CFO into transferring a significant sum of money, about $25 million, to another account. Obviously, that was a deepfake. It was a fraudulent video, but they lost a significant sum of money. And so I think that is probably one of the most interesting illustrations of how AI can impact sort of our day-to-day operations, and how sort of insidious it can be. I think from my perspective, sort of where I sit, we're seeing more and more sort of AI being used to impact identity theft with respect to the creation of synthetic identities and things like that. And that can be very tricky because identity theft in particular, I think, is one area where I think a lot of us we have controls in place. We've got our know your customer. We know how to check the documentation. And so I think that there's a level of complacency there with respect to how we're verifying identity that AI can really take advantage of if we're not careful.
So, Lee or David, do you have any other examples that you like to throw out there that might help identify some of the particular topics? Because I know Heather just raised a couple things that will definitely be worthwhile to kind of tease apart.
Yeah, my favorite was earlier this year. There was a whole flurry, and by flurry I mean probably a half dozen or so. But common end users bought cars for $1 because they used an evasion attack on a AI at a car dealer and kept asking questions until it accepted their agreement to buy the brand new car for $1. And that was a deployed AI, clearly not very well tested or secured, but a couple happy winners with new cars for $1. And at least in one case, the dealership honored it, which kind of startled me. But there's others who are still trying to get their $1 car.
Yeah, and I suspect that will be an uphill battle to climb on that front. It certainly will present interesting legal questions as to what constitutes a contract and who can have that meeting of the minds. But Lee, I'll turn it over to you for last thoughts on the real world examples that you might have spotted that come top to mind right now.
I certainly hear a lot from people that I speak to in healthcare and beyond about the unfortunate risk of audio deepfakes, whether it's everything from CEO impersonation to a person's family member, the voice being unfortunately synthesized to simulate that individual. And I think that's quite scary. And I think, frankly, I hope in this conversation we get to explore some mechanisms as to how we can incorporate some measures that we're a little bit more aware, and if it hits us, what to do.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point that it is definitely necessary to talk about some of those defensive measures. But first, kind of what I'd like kind of each of you, if you can, to help just kind of tease apart and maybe break down into what actually composes some of these kind of threat vectors. It's Heather, I think you mentioned deepfakes and synthetic identities, and Lee, I know you were just going in that direction. David, you talked about evasion attacks. So why don't we pick out deepfakes first? And Heather, since you brought that up, I'll turn that to you. And Lee, I'll ask you to, or actually, sorry, maybe Lee, you were talking about audio deepfakes. So if you can you just explain how are those constructed, and then how are those types of attacks deployed?
Sure. Well, there are tools like Descript and others that essentially allow a person to record your voice, and with as little as 10 seconds or even a clip, you can literally reconstruct a person's voice so that it sounds like the person said X, Y, or Z. The point of deepfakes, though, is the fact that it is fake, so it's a simulation. And of course, it's a computer simulation of someone's voice based on the various pitch and cadence and just the general prosody of the voice, the actual markers, what that person's voice print looks like. So essentially an extrapolation. And because audio is pretty light in terms that it's data and everything else, calculation-wise, as the AI engine, so to speak, manufactures a fake, it doesn't take that much compute time. It doesn't take that much time to generate something that is fake. I mean, some of the earlier versions of deepfakes before they were called deepfakes in the commercial world, I think Adobe has a demonstration on YouTube about a researcher's voice being mimicked. And there's also, I'm probably going to mispronounce it, but I believe it's called Lyrebird. And that's at least 4 years old. And just emphasizing, it's unfortunately been around a while. And in our day and age of not really knowing necessarily our coworkers, colleagues, even friends in the social media space, because we're typically distant, the probability of a person falling for a deep fake, whether audio visual, is much higher as a result of the lack of familiarity.
Yeah, great point.
I just want to chime in on there on kind of two themes, particularly around healthcare. And one is everyone knows you can go to the dark web, buy a ransomware kit, buy an attack, all that. But you have to have some skill to be able to navigate the dark web and even to launch those attacks if you get a kit. What we're seeing now, and we're at a great convergence in healthcare, we're seeing groundbreaking technologies that are going to change healthcare and how we deliver it. But it isn't, these things don't stand alone. So the first thing I kind of want to introduce is what is being called the democratization of fraud. And that is all the stuff out there. And AI is, you don't need to be a hacker. You don't need to have deep skills. You can go get a AI kit and do some of this stuff that Lee is talking about. So there's that. We've coupled AI in a world where being bad is profitable. And the other thing is when you couple that with healthcare, some of the things we've seen across healthcare is in patient care, patients are actually more trusting of bots than sometimes talking to a person. There's been therapy sessions where patients have preferred and chosen a bot. So when you couple a deep fake to a population that prefers to talk to AI, it's just staggering what you think a well-trained and smart bad guy could do with that information.
No, and as you said, David, taking advantage of growing expectations of how those interactions are going to occur, really creates a danger. So, I guess kind of thinking about, as Lee and David, you were both highlighting the easy creation of deep fakes and the synthetic or the new kind of audio of someone. What are some of the ways that you can actually then be able to detect it and be able to respond? So, Heather, maybe I'll turn that over to you first.
Yeah, because I think this kind of goes hand in hand with the creation of the synthetic identities as well. So we sort of moved to biometrics as a way to sort of bolster our identity verification of folks. And I'm not sure if all of our audience is familiar with what a synthetic identity is, but essentially it's rather than stealing a real identity from an actual individual, they can cherry pick different identity elements from a data set that's been compromised and kind of put that together. And so those compromised data sets essentially become training data for AI that can be used in a malicious way. And so then you can do that and then create an AI portrait of this new person with their synthetic identity. And so when healthcare organizations are saying, okay, but you have to send us a picture of your driver's license along with these identity elements, well, now that becomes a lot easier for them to do it. The I think fortunate thing is, and I've said this before, AI in and of itself is a tool. It is not inherently bad, it's not inherently good. And so it's the way that we use it that determines those qualities, right? So we can use AI also to sort of fight fire with fire. And so there are solutions now that are in place that can say, okay, I am going to determine whether or not this is an actual picture of a person or if it's an AI generated picture. And so there are tools out there that can help you in making that distinction. And so you can put that together with your existing identity verification protocol to help combat some of that. And I think the challenge that we have as professionals that are sort of tasked with maintaining compliance and security within our organizations is to make sure that just as the criminals are iterating, because we're not looking at new techniques necessarily here, right? We're looking on iterations of old techniques using new technology. And so we have to make sure that we're doing that as well. So we're taking a look at our existing fraud prevention measures and saying, okay, how can we leverage existing AI to fight what they're trying to do with us as well?
Yeah, and I think, as you said, leveraging kind of, or not common, but older practices, iterating on them and having them evolve, so you can take advantage of how technology can enhance those. It sounds like it kind of mirrors just a lot of the discussion around technology, where it's not necessarily introducing new ideas, it's augmenting and enabling, either enhanced efficiency or enhanced use. It's not a replacement, but it's kind of driving. Further and better use. But Lee and David, I'll turn it over to both of you just to see kind of your perspectives on use of AI as a defensive tool, and being able to combat the augmentation on the offensive side from AI as well.
Yeah, AI is very good at doing some rote exercise. I think probably, and Lee may have better insights into this than me, but routine analysis of network traffic, stuff coming in that you don't expect to see, and at a big organization that's voluminous, you could have armies sitting in front of screens 24/7 and not see everything. And so I think there are applications for AI, for artificial intelligence in tying security down. But at this point, the key word I think is still artificial. And you want to measure those false positives, and AI is self-learning, so it will get better over time, but it still needs to be controlled. Healthcare is a sector that is changing very rapidly, always been focused on moving ahead quickly. And if you're selling a product like a car, you look at the sleek look and the fast feel, and we invest in accelerators. But this may be an opportunity with really a groundbreaking technology, I believe, to spend a little money on maybe the brakes and the dashboards and the screens you're looking out of, to make sure that it's really doing what you want it to do in the way you want it to do, in the time frame you want it to do it. I think just we can't deny it. It's here to stay, and we need to utilize it. But to let it loose without the controls, without knowing there's a brake and an emergency brake, is just too high risk in this sector, or any sector, actually, frankly.
And I think that it's one thing to talk about defensive tools and even tools to detect, let's say, audio deepfakes. Having spoken with a lot of people across critical infrastructure, healthcare, finance, otherwise, it's unfortunate, but let me give the bad news. And unfortunately, I at least don't believe that there are any highly accurate tools out there for automatically detecting, is this the person's voice? But I'm here to tell you, and I'm just sort of synthesizing what you, Heather, and what you, David, just expressed. Let's break it back a little bit to what we're talking about. Technology will always change. We'll have different techniques. We'll have different innovations. We'll have improvements over the current state of the art. Cool, that's a certain. But what we need to keep in mind is that when we're combating deep fakes, whether audio-visual, something live like this, whatever it is, I think we always need to bear in mind, number one, do we have an accurate representation of that person's voice originally, like original voice print? Or is it just a guess, like yeah, that's how Tom sounds like? Or do we have an actual recent photograph of what that person really, truly looks like, or a video? Or is it just, again, relying on memory? I'm here to say, no matter how great a human's memory is, even if you have a very sharp memory, you still need that reference. So to add in a scientist's perspective, if you want to build a really good defense as to deepfakes and all this other stuff, have your original reference, whatever it is. I know it sounds hokey, and yes, we kind of want to be lazy and rely on technology, but human discernment, whether it's intuition or just simply saying, I don't think that looks like Tom. I don't think that sounds like him. I don't think that's how his body language is. that's going to be our what's going to really change things. That, and as Heather had said, we need to look at the basics of how these things are put together. And David, we worked together, in the past as well for years. I think we all know with all this social engineering stuff, folks, it's not just simply what solution that's $100,000 will fix it. No, the answer is the best defense, and I'll emphasize this to anyone, and security awareness companies, I loved you. There's a place for you. And I certainly, encourage what you are doing. I think that helps us. But we must not forget the psychology behind attacks. Social engineers will try to get to us when we're on vacation, when it's right before a holiday, when it's early in the morning, when it's late at night, maybe when the guy or gal is on night shift, trying to target a company. And it's as much of psychological warfare as it is warfare vis-a-vis technical means. Anyway, I didn't mean to make this into a grand speech. I just had to say those things.
No, and I'm just going to reiterate for almost 30 years, I've been saying security at the end of the day is a people problem. No, it's not a technical issue. Technology is simple. People are very complex, and we have to do the training. Ascension in their announcement this week about their breach said it was someone clicked on a fish they shouldn't have. Well, phishing is just social engineering via email. And I completely agree with Lee. She has nailed this. If we're going to proceed with this, there has to be a huge human education and training component around it to make people aware of the risks to themselves as well as others when they're using these tools.
And I think the key word that I picked out of your comments there, Lee, was discernment. And I think discernment on sort of at the end user level, right? We have to be able to look at an email and go, that seems odd. That seems weird. And the way you do that is through increased awareness and, just talking about it in training. And, we actually had a conversation with a group at our company this morning specifically about how AI is allowing people to come up with more sophisticated phishing attacks. Because they will hit you when you're on vacation or at that late shift. So we have to sort of, as humans, become, a little more judicious in how we respond to these things. And I think we also need to be judicious and use discernment in the way we deploy AI, because to your point, both of you, David and Lee, these are still emerging technologies. How are they deployed in solutions that we might look at implementing in our environment? How are they deployed in solutions that we might already have in our environment? And we don't know that AI is being deployed. And so we have to sort of level up our introspection with respect not just to ourselves and how we're receiving information and requests for information, but also in how we're protecting our organization. Because what happened or what worked 2 months ago, we might need to take another look at just an ongoing continuous monitoring process of both the defensive and offensive use of AI.
Yeah, I fully agree with all those comments, especially the focus on the individual and needing to train and drive, as all of you said, discernment, which I think has become now a key word there. If people weren't already thinking in that direction. And Heather, you started to touch on this, but how is AI influencing or changing those social engineering attacks? Is it enabling a greater focus on different areas, or trying to get into someone's mind in a different way, or is it pulling information from different sources? So, for example, you said maybe it's helping to push out more attacks while someone's on vacation. So, kind of what are some of the ways that if it's known now, how is AI influencing the use of those social engineering based attacks?
It spells better and uses better English than most of the bad guys.
It does, for sure. And I think to the point that you made, it draws on more data sets. So instead of sort of the old fashioned back in the day, like stalking somebody's LinkedIn and trying to correlate it to Facebook and You know, oh, now I know that she works at this company and she's going on vacation on this day, and this is the person that she works with. It does that so much faster and with a greater level of accuracy. So when I get an email that's spear phishing, or I get a text, or even a phone call using a voice synthesis, my criteria is going to be, well, they know a lot about me, or they're saying a lot of things that are accurate that they would only know if, and you make an assumption. And so I think they're able to sort of combat sort of our psychological and sort of our innate human defenses, because we're like, oh, well, they know this, they're familiar, they're saying things that they would only know if they knew that. So I think the ability to use correlated data sets and even compromised data sets, you know, we compromised your bank information, we can correlate that with a breach of a gaming system, we can correlate that with a breach of whatever it might be, and now you've got a lot of data that looks very specific. So I think it's sort of attacking our psyche a little bit more than it is just, you know, let's find the most complacent person, because they're even getting people that are pretty vigilant about what they're doing. So I think that's, to my mind, one of the sort of most nefarious things about the use of AI in social engineering.
So, Lee, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I also wanted to add a perspective that language is no longer a barrier, including on the offensive side. I am a student learning Italian and French, and I could say, using popular generative AI models, I could compose messages that are written very, very fluently. You know, to Heather's point about fluency in language. And I could check that, of course, with a different model to make sure that it translates correctly. Fortunately, in, for example, the Italian language, there's a lot of literal translation in terms of how we say things versus how, to some extent, in Italian, you might say something. So that's a little bit easier. But nonetheless, just think about the possibilities. Things could be written much more clearly, more convincing. You can even ask AI to craft a certain message within a certain character limit, and also to mimic, let's say, the CEO's or CFO's specific tone, uploading a document the person may have written, or sharing an email message or other message the person may have written. So it's very good at matching tone. And gosh, there's so many ways in which, since unfortunately cybercrime is business, it can also save the bad guys time, such as reading through thousands of pages and being able to pinpoint a weakness or aberration or something of interest and give us the bullet points, whereas before it may have taken us days or hours. And other things, such as the ability to just simply synthesize and build on previous conversations through that quote unquote memory, all kinds of things. It's also wonderful, much, much better from the early days of GitHub Copilot. What GitHub Copilot and others can do now in terms of coding is amazing and brilliant. It's extremely good at calculations, extremely good at coding. Of course, we need to test things, because sometimes the things that these things put out is just false and silly and just sometimes based on assumptions. But time is money, and it's made things so much easier. So again, a bolus of information, but definitely it causes us to be superheroes or supervillains.
Given kind of all those risks, you know, and the fact that all three of you a few minutes ago highlighted the importance of each individual and the judgment that each person can bring, you know, obviously, I think the past couple statements might be kind of having people worried that they're not going to be able to actually combat these attacks. So what are some of the kind of concrete recommendations that each of you might have to train individuals to, as best they can, be prepared for, and, you know, I'm not going to say always prevent a successful attack, but at least minimize the likelihood of that happening? So David, I'll turn to you first on that front.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to come at it from kind of a different way. One of the things I've been noticing around all the hype around AI is we have very specific promises around it. There's revenue cycle companies that talk about how AI can improve your revenue cycle, and even clinicians talk about decision support, and there's very specific examples about clinical decision making using AI across large populations. But when we get to the threats, they're all kind of implied, and they range from a deep fake of President Trump showing up in your medical record to the end of humankind as we know it. And I think what we've got to do is shift that, and we've got to make those threats more specific and not implicit. How does this impact me if I use this tool? What can happen to me? I get the benefits. Those have all been explained to me. But let's talk about the bad thing that can happen, the risks you're going to take. I mean, we still see that everywhere. I mean, hospitals are still putting in metapixel browsers that are running metapixel, and we know what happens when you do that. But I don't think we've gotten it down to the human level, and that's going to be the next step. We have to show people the benefits they're going to get advertised to because someone's selling it to them. But we have to explain to them the bad thing that can happen intentionally or unintentionally when you use these tools. People still don't understand how their data gets used. They go shopping and don't understand why they're seeing those feeds for 3 weeks in their browser. And it's because security has failed to explain how that happens. And I think that's going to have to be the story with AI. We're going to have to be smarter than the AI in explaining the risks.
So Lee, I'll turn it over to you next, since you kind of introduced the psychological component of the discussion, and kind of see what your recommendations might be, or where you think defense might be able to go.
Absolutely. I think that in terms of just simply educating people, if we're talking about defense against social engineering attacks, I think we need to educate people, first of all, in terms of having a plan, and before you educate them, have that plan as to if something sounds not quite right, as Heather had said, an instinct, an intuition, how you can actually call or contact that person through official communication channels and decide within your organization, what are those? Do we still have our traditional office phone numbers? That may or may not be the case. Do we still have, like, for example, an official communications channel, chatting with our teams in a certain way, or official private message through official means as opposed to a mere text message? Leverage those points of official comms, and always abide by the same process. Don't think, well, someone's on vacation, maybe it's easier if something doesn't seem right, you have to confirm the legitimacy with original sources. And furthermore, I would say, I think we know this with things like elections coming up and all kinds of things that are happening in the world, whether it's other countries' elections too. There's a lot of talk about this misinformation and disinformation. And psychologically, these are real big levers that cyber criminals, bad actors, scammers, whomever push, because they realize in the social media age, the TikTok age, we might be spending less time in discerning and looking at things and trying to confirm things. So to essentially develop that muscle, so to speak, in terms of confirming a certain data point or a certain question or a certain request, I think we need to educate our people in terms of what misinformation is, as in something that's unintentionally misinformed, versus disinformation, where it's something that's intentionally deceitful. And unfortunately, that does happen. I mean, what is social engineering? It truly is just simply a bad person has a request, and they essentially make us do something we ordinarily would not do under our own free will had we have the actual knowledge of the truth of what their intention is. And that's all it is. It's, you know, they are trying to get to a point where we aren't able to detect such things. So I would say, yes, security awareness companies continue to deploy your solutions that way. That general baseline knowledge is helpful. But if you do get something suspicious like a deep fake or a strange smishing message or a strange email or a strange social media outreach, and you confer with your team and you're able to share it, that actual intelligence is indeed the best intelligence of anything that's simulated by the best security awareness companies in the world. You have to supplement because they have a lead time to produce their educational materials. They're a business like everything else. And what we're seeing now in the wild certainly has a much shorter cycle. And the intelligence value of being able to share right away, you got to capitalize it. You got to protect your people with information.
And I just want to back up one step from that, Matt, because I've been doing this for too long, and I'm a governance guy, built IT governance, security governance, data governance, and healthcare still doesn't quite get governance. And it might be better in a conclusion, but if you're going to bring in AI into a healthcare organization or an organization that supports healthcare, you really need to have a governance model, a strong governance model that includes all those players. It's probably a lengthy charter that talks about the span of control, the structures, who participates, and at what level. And what I don't see often in charters around new technologies is the training and education and ongoing awareness. It can't stop. So that's kind of a jumping off point. If you haven't built the awareness training into the charter of your AI governance, you're already climbing an uphill mountain.
And I would maybe take that even a step further. And again, I'm a compliance person, so I always counsel a heavy dose of skepticism around everything. Compliance people, we're good at catastrophizing. It's what we do. But I'm also a big believer in the process, the guidelines, the policy in place. So use of AI is not out of bounds of your existing governance structure. Definitely have a charter. Talk about what are the uses and limitations of AI, what are the things that you're going to evaluate, what are the criteria for the value that it's going to add to your organization, but also don't dismiss your other existing policies, your third-party risk management process where you're doing your information security due diligence. That's critical. You need to understand what they're doing to protect things like their training data. How are they getting that training data? Do they have consent for it? How are they managing data access requests for things like that? So, you know, the other part of that is your identity verification processes. If you're in, for example, we're in payments industry, so know your customer obviously is going to be extremely important. You get documentation, you follow all of your existing KYC, CIP processes. There are some solutions out there that can help you bump up identity documentation against known state databases to make sure that they are consistent. There's some administration that has to go along with that to make sure that you're, you know, up to date and all of that. But you have to maintain the muscle memory, business as usual processes that you have in place, because that's what gives you that sort of internal scaffolding of this doesn't feel right. This is asking me to go outside of our normal process. And double check things. Like if you get a phone call, I tell people this all the time. If you get a phone call from somebody that says, hey, I need XYZ information, this is who I am, that's great. I will call you back. And you hang up the phone and you call back, as Lee said, a known communication number for that contact. If you get a request from information from a government agency, that's great. Call them back on a known contact and confirm that person actually works for that agency before you give it. So it's a healthy dose of skepticism, your internal intuition as a human, coupled with making sure you're following your documented, implemented business as usual practices for your governance. It's just, caution, a lot of caution.
Yeah, it seems like caution is definitely the word of the day kind of across the board. And I actually want to back up a couple of steps to a different point that all of you were talking about a little bit ago, and that was the different data sets that are out there. One, the data sets that are being used for nefarious purposes of, developing either the deep fakes or the social engineering attacks. And then on the other side, it's, I think these, or may have been all three of you talking about how we can use our own data sets to either help arm people with knowledge to avoid falling prey to an attack or to enhance the internal defenses. So the first question I want to ask is, is it possible to even control the data that's available to the criminals or the people on the attack? Because there have been so many breaches and so much information is out there. What kind of concerns go around that arguably ready availability of data that can construct so many different pictures of folks? And, kind of what are the implications of those data sets being out there? So I'll open it up and kind of let any of the three of you jump in if you have any immediate thoughts on that front.
Well, I'll jump in, and we're talking about deploying AI, and in this discussion we'll limit it to for security resources. But what no one talks about who's implementing AI is what it takes and the investment in AI, and we're just really beginning to understand that. There's a lot of time and money that will be invested in resources like computing power, memory, data to build and maintain these AI systems. The data sets themselves are massive, so they're probably going to be distributed data, which creates additional security issues the more highly you distribute that data. But we can't ever forget that the hackers are using AI. Microsoft developed an AI tool for neural fuzzing, which is where they blast multiple random inputs at a piece of software. Well, the bad guys can take that same neural fuzzing technique and use it against the software we have deployed. And they don't worry about things like budgets and rules and regulations and finding resources because they go take them. So we're talking about all the wonderful things we can do, but we need to take a deeper look and broader look at what it's really going to take to get there. And then coming back to Heather's question, what problem are we trying to solve for, and is it worth solving that problem?
Heather, it looked like you were about to jump in as well on the data set question.
I was going to say, and I think Lee hit on this point earlier as well, is one of the inherent challenges that we're dealing with is that there is so much data available to the bad guys that it makes it exceedingly difficult to try to ferret out what is real and what is not. And so I think it becomes incumbent on us, from a data perspective, it's really challenging, but it is, again, it falls back to discernment. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't look right. The tools to help detect whether or not there's false data out there are evolving, but they're not, I think, necessarily the best thing to fall back on. And so we have to make sure that we are consistent with our use of our data so that we can recognize good data when it appears. We have to use human oversight when data comes in. We can't just put a prompt into an AI solution and hope that what comes out is correct. So we have to use some human oversight to everything. And it's one of those real challenges, and it's a little bit like fighting a bit of asymmetric warfare. So I am stubbornly optimistic about our abilities, but it is a challenge right now, to be fair.
And Lee.
Sure. I think that the thing we have to keep in mind about why these bad guys are currently winning, and certainly this concept doesn't rest with me, but I feel like private sector doesn't appreciate this concept enough. And there's two words: information superiority. Heather had mentioned asymmetric warfare. The principle behind that is that essentially, at least as of now, bad guys know much more about our systems and networks than we do. And that shouldn't be. We should use AI from a defensive perspective so that it can help us learn every freaking thing that we have on our network in terms of endpoints, rogue devices, everything else. Cataloging our assets, even knowing what our intellectual property is. Confession, I am an IP attorney, so I'm always sensitive about this, Matt. But I think, and maybe you might agree, that people sometimes don't respect their IP enough. So I think we need to safeguard it. And I think this whole business of, well, I think social media is wonderful. And for myself, at times it's open doors. It's a wonderful tool. I don't mean to bash it. But we do tend to overshare information, whether it's personal or professional. And I keep thinking about when my DHS AP team was at a certain very well-regarded security company in Boston. I can't name who it was or what it is, but the CTO at this company had talked to us about this relatively new concept of spear phishing and how it is almost fractions of pennies for a very highly convincing spear phishing email to be crafted and all that stuff. But I'm here to say, fast forward now to 2024, and how much information not only do the good companies in the world have about us, but how much information do we let the world know about us? Just wanted to end there in terms of my remarks. Sorry, David.
Yeah, I was just going to say the saddest part of that, Lee, and I'm sure we've had this discussion, is that most people don't realize the value of their data. And that has to be part of the education around AI in particular, but phishing, that they want all the convenience, but they don't understand every time they click, okay, use my data, that's money to some company. And until we accept that that data is valuable, we're not going to protect it the same way.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. It's, as I often say to people, if a tool is free, then you're the product. Yeah. Because it kind of implicit, I think what all you're saying is the entire purpose then is to gather your data, because if you actually read the terms of use or terms and conditions, which, I know pretty much no one reads, even though I've drafted many of them over the course of my career, very often those are, saying we're going to take and mine your data for various purposes. So kind of from that perspective, and I think starting maybe to go in the direction you were talking about, Lee, about, the arguable oversharing that people do on social media, what would be some good data practices that could then, going forward to the extent possible, maybe limit the data that's being shared or that could be exposed by not putting so much out there? So Lee, since you kind of already implicitly started going in that direction, I'll turn it over to you first.
Well, I think that the first thing for us to be cognizant of is that we shouldn't go on this phrase of pushing out as much information and sharing it with third parties and for whatever other purpose. Of course, we know under HIPAA, the minimum necessary rule. I think that if we took a page from DoD in terms of going with the need to know and the minimum necessary to achieve a purpose, then we should always be cognizant of that, especially when sharing with third parties, even if they are our vendors. So I wanted to essentially just give that slice in terms of where my head is at the second.
And I just add, given yesterday's announcement, when the Surgeon General of the United States wants to put a label on social media for children, there's an indicator of a problem there. And we have let it go on for too long. AI will exacerbate it to a degree we probably can't even imagine it. So we've got to put this genie back in the bottle to the greatest degree we can. We now understand what social media does to kids. We're naive if we don't think it's doing the exact same thing to the adults. for overusing, and that addiction then causes more data to be pushed out there and shared and going places where it shouldn't go to.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on to that, because I think this is sort of analogous to what we do sort of in our organizations with the, using various different applications. Is with social media, you're not just sharing data on that social media platform. Read the terms of, I know nobody wants to read the terms of service and the end user agreements. I'm one of those weirdos that will, to see where my data is being shared. But understand how they're collecting data from other applications and from your device, because you leave that application, it's still collecting data about you. And I don't think people really understand that. And so I think from an organizational level, as we see more and more of our vendors and third parties incorporating AI into their solutions, we need to understand the interplay of that ability in our environments. And I think that's something that often gets overlooked. And so, adding an AI questionnaire to your vendor documentation, going back to your existing vendors and seeing how they've augmented their application, because I think there's a level of complacency with existing vendors. But just understanding, because that business model of just data harvesting exists beyond social media.
Yeah, and kind of picking up on that aspect to it, and kind of the point that you just raised, David, where there are public calls that seem to be coming out with some more frequency of some type, at least for social media, the government, having a label or, any type of government intervention, thinking more broadly about AI and, maybe in light of the bill that passed in Colorado, but, kind of what do each of you see coming from the government perspective? Like, are we going to start all of a sudden getting a patchwork of state laws trying to address AI? Or, I know obviously there have been a couple executive orders directing reviews and particular directions. Do you think we'll end up with federal action on it? And Lee, I think I'll turn that over to you, just because I know you and I have worked together in the past through HIMSS and other places where policy on this direction has been brought up.
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked, because I recently was on a call with essentially the same folks that put out the things like the UCC, and as an observer, they had told me that these things are still being thought of at the state level. And interestingly, they also told me, that is the Uniform Law Commission, they told me that the reason why to date typically states do not use the term artificial intelligence in legislation is because there's no widely accepted definition for AI. So things that we know today that exist, for example, in New York City, as to, like, for example, ensuring that we don't have bias in terms of automated employment decision systems. Those things use terms like automated decision making. But what did, at least according to our friends with the organization, what did they say that essentially means? That means AI. So we're still very much still behind in terms of trying to standardize our understanding of AI and what that means to us. Ever since the news of ChatGPT and other things broke, people on the Hill are very taking classes, they're inquiring, they've been extremely proactive in terms of learning about this. So what comes next is anyone's best guess, but I do know that there's currently research into how do we pivot this the best so that there's some kind of impact. However, I can also say that if there's a model law or regulation that's we're probably looking at, I would say if you haven't read yet the EU AI Act, it's a fascinating read. It's a window into where AI will go, including its harms and also its benefits. And I'm certain that even though I'm not on the inside, I'm certain that people in our country and beyond are closely looking at it and maybe being inspired by it.
So no, Lee, thank you for those insights. And seeing that we're getting very close to the end of the hour, I think probably what makes sense to be able to close it up is, I'll turn it over to each of you to provide a little bit of departing thoughts. So how about Heather? I'll turn it over to you first.
I think AI it's an exciting technology for a number of reasons. But I think, as with any new technology, it's always best approached with caution. You take a measured approach to it. And I always go back to, is this something that we're leveraging because it's a genuine need and it solves a genuine problem in a way that is better than a traditional tool might do? As opposed to, this is a bright, shiny thing and we want to implement it so that we aren't behind the market necessarily. Sometimes it's best not to be a market leader. And the adoption of a technology in AI might be a good case for that. So I think, again, and I've said this and I'll stand by it, AI in and of itself, not inherently bad, not inherently good either. So it's important to make sure that you've got appropriate governance in place. And it's also important to maintain a healthy dose of skepticism with respect to what it's able to achieve for your organization, and a healthy dose of skepticism for what you're taking in that might be a result of AI. So I guess my final takeaway is caution and discernment. That's going to be my word of the day. Lee, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. Dave, we'll go to you next, and then Lee, we'll let you close it out, because I think you've been giving us some great soapbox moments today.
Yeah, I would just echo what Heather said. I think it has the potential to be a groundbreaking technology across all sectors, particularly I think in healthcare, where we've got staffing issues, we've got remote care issues. There's a lot of ways AI could help us in healthcare. We live in a society that speed is of the essence. Thank you, attorneys, for that lovely phrase. But there are some things you have to do right. You can't just do them fast. This is one of those things because we don't understand the implications. The first steam engines blew up. They sank boats. They killed people. Let's not do it that way. Let's go slow and make sure we get the technology right and understand the implications, how to use it. And the theme of the day, again, discernment, that we train people to understand what they're using. And then last but not least, the great break of all times, governance. We need to be able to proceed ahead, but do it slowly and in a cautious way.
Yeah, thank you, David. Now, Lee.
I wanted to encourage everyone that while it's, yes, for work, absolutely follow the policies and procedures that your workplace wants you to do in terms of AI, and because we all need to be on the same page in terms of that. But personally, I do believe that humanity will be profoundly impacted by AI. It's not just hype. It will make you faster, better, stronger, and we all want to be faster, better, stronger. So I would say it's working with AI is just like being in a car, let's say a Tesla car that's self-driving. 99% of the time, it'll be just fine. It'll navigate traffic conditions and everything. But occasionally, for even some kind of weird reason you might not even know about, it might change lanes on you. Don't be afraid to be that human and intervene and gently prod the AI to go the other way. We'll always need some kind of human review and discernment, no matter what they say, because we can't lose touch of human good and our humanity and helping others and making sure we're still pointed true north and doing the right thing for people.
Yeah, no, thank you for those comments and from everybody. And, I think as all of you said, the kind of common thread there is that human factor and that human element. And it's not just, one person by themselves. It's, kind of looking at that collective and coordinating and collaborating with other people, because, that's where a lot of the strength will end up lying. But again, thank you to Heather, Lee, David for joining the panel today. Thank you to all of you listening. We greatly appreciate you attending, and hopefully you enjoyed the discussion.
And as people are commenting and chatting in, yes, a copy of this recording will be sent to everybody. And yes, they are all rock stars. I don't know if I will sleep a little better tonight or a little worse, but we shall see. Thank you again for all your time. I imagine we'll be talking about this conversation again sometime in our future. So I'll be knocking on your virtual door. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.